And so let's not restrict it to those things. Okay. So we'll come to the message. Now, when we think about the future, for us as a church, over the last, I think, 3 years, certainly, we've been declining. And that is a challenge for us, isn't it? And that brings about a weight, sometimes of heaviness and concern and wonder about what's going to happen in the future. And so with Giles and Lauren going, it's like, with them going, that leaves a big hole. And Jen going as well. And so there are a couple of things that I was thinking about this, and that is, what does the Lord hold in store for us as a church? And there are certain things that He hasn't made clear, but there are other things that He has made clear for us as individuals and as a church. And it's good for us to know what we can be clear about and what we're not clear about, and how to respond to both those situations. And the first thing that I want to say that I think we can be clear about is this. And I want to say this isn't really an integrated part of the message, but it's important to say this, that life in Moulsecoomb, not just living in Moulsecoomb, but being part of our church, of course it's a challenge, isn't it? It's not like other churches where you go and, week on week things are advancing, and, where actually, you can just be a part of it and it's not really that hard. In our church, you have to work really hard. It's like we've been swimming against the tide, but the current seems to be pushing us back, even though we swim really hard. And that's hard work, isn't it? And the news that Jen's going, Giles and Laura going, that can mean working even harder. And the verse that we need to remember is this, and be confident about is this. Jesus says this, doesn't he? He says, "Come to me, all who are weary, and I will give you what? Rest." See, whatever the future holds for us, I do not believe for a moment that it's the placing of a heavier burden on any of our shoulders. Okay, so I want you to be assured of that. If what we do is going to make, whatever we do, if it's going to place a heavier burden on our shoulders, I don't believe that will be of the Lord. He says, "Come to me and I will give you rest." And that's what we need. However, that's not all that he says in that verse, is it? He says, "Come to me and I will give you rest. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." So I believe that whatever happens, we'll be entering a season of rest, but not passive rest. See, it's never passive rest. Jesus says, "Take my yoke." In other words, it's still work, but it's his work. And he says, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." And in other words, whatever he's got for us, whatever work he's got for us, it will be a work in which we find rest for our souls. My yoke is easy, my burden is light, and you will find rest for your souls. I think that's good news, isn't it? And we've got to keep that before us. And I just wanted to begin by saying that. But as we look at this passage here, I want us to begin by focusing on verse 9. Now, the Apostle Paul is writing from prison. He's been imprisoned. And he's writing back to the church. And so he's got quite a bit of time in his hands. And one of the things that he's doing is praying, particularly for the church at Philippi. And look at what he's praying. He says this, "And this is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best, and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and praise of God." Amen. So that's his prayer. He prays that the church might abound in love and in knowledge, that they might discern. And I think, again, as we think about our future, and this applies to every single one of us as individuals, okay? But also for us, corporately as a church, what does the Lord want for us as we look forward? He wants us to abound in love more and more. This is, whatever our work has got to be in keeping with that, right? Abound in love more and more. However much we love one another, however much we love God, and however much we love the lost, the Lord wants us to grow in our love for Him. And our love will grow for God, for one another, and not so much for the lost. You don't actually read the Bible says God so loved the world that He gave His only Son. He loves we love the lost, but it's not just, we love them. There's a difference between the way that we love God and the way that we love one another and the way that we love the lost. And here's the way, the way that we express our love for the lost. It's in this, it's in our desire for them to come to know the Lord Jesus above everything else. If we miss that out, however we're loving them, it's not a godly love. Our greatest desire, heart for them, isn't that they have a prosperous life, is it? I mean, we want people to have a good life. It's not that they have a long life even. Will we rather they had a short life and found the Lord, rather than a full, long life, full life. And so, love abounding for the lost is a growing desire and compassion to making known to them the gospel that saved us. That's how our love abounds to the lost. We never want to miss that bit out. It's the most important thing for our love for the lost. So He wants our love to abound for God Himself, for one another, and for the lost. Remember, for God so loved the world, that includes us. And the gospel is attached to that He gave His only Son. Two inseparable statements, really. So, I want to encourage us to do that. That as we go from here, from this day, that we go with a desire to grow in love for one another, for God, and for the lost. So that kind of sets the stage, really, for the rest of the passage. The next verse that I want us to look at, what we're going to do is look at some verses. I'll be making some comments and tying it all up at the end. Is verse 12. Look at what Paul writes. Now, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that what has happened to me has actually served to advance the gospel. As a result, it has become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. And because of my chains, most of the brothers and sisters have become confident in the Lord and dare all the more to proclaim the gospel without fear. It is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of good will. That I do so out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defence of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I am in chains. But what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached, and because of this I rejoice. So Paul writes to me, he says, I want you to know that what has happened to me has happened for the advance of the gospel. Now, we learn as we read the book, the whole sort of letter that Paul writes, that the church in Philippi were the key partners with the Apostle Paul on this particular mission. He'd gone out on a mission and they were his supporters. They supported very generously. In chapter 2 and verse 25, we can see something of their investment. But I think it's necessary, Paul says, to send back to you Epaphroditus. They had sent him, Paul with his team, Timothy and maybe others, their very own Epaphroditus. So they made a big sacrifice. Now bear in mind, churches in those days actually were very much like our church in terms of their size. They were small, they met in people's front rooms. The big churches would have had as many as 35. That's at those times. And so this is a small group, and they've sent out their best, Epaphroditus. They've invested in Paul's mission. Not only that, but they've supported financially and heavily. In chapter 4, verses 4 to 19, we can see that. Well, I'll read from verse 10 actually. I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. Yet it was good of you to share in my troubles. Moreover, as you Philippians know, in the early days of your acquaintance with the gospel, when I set out from Macedonia, not one church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving except you only. They were the only church that supported Paul's mission. So he was leaning heavily on this church, and they gave him Epaphroditus, their best guy. They've sent lots of money and provision so that this gospel mission can go forward. Now just think for a moment about this. The Apostle Paul, no doubt, well we know he spent some time with that church. And you can imagine him telling them about the mission that he's embarking on, right? So he's getting to know them as a church, and he's saying to them, God's calling me to this next place, and he's hoping that they, like some other churches, would support him. None of the other churches have, but they get the vision. They get the mission, that this thing that Paul's doing, and they want to be a part of this advance of the gospel. They're excited about it. They hear the plans, and as they hear the plans, Epaphroditus is sitting there, he's getting really excited, feeling, maybe I should go along, and others agree to that, and you can imagine them sending him off, Epaphroditus, to join Paul on the mission. But things seemed to go terribly wrong. So we know, don't we, Paul is banged up in prison, and Epaphroditus has been so ill he almost died. Now, for the church back in Philippi, think what it's like for them. There's Paul, I've got this great plan, we're going to go here, and like he has in other places, he went from city to city, place to place, one church established, another church established, but then he gets to Philippi and everyone's expecting the same thing, and he's banged up in prison, and their precious Epaphroditus, at least at one stage they hear, we think he might die. And again, remember, this is a small church. It would have been made up of groups of families. It would be like, I was thinking, what it must have been like for them. It would be like me hearing the news that Jade, who's gone to Scotland, is so ill she might die. And the guy that was meant to be heading it all up has been banged up in prison. And the other dynamic is this. Unlike us, we can pick up the phone and find out. They couldn't. They'd have heard, and they wouldn't have heard anything for ages. What's happening? Well, how does it happen with us? You can imagine how they'd have been praying. And then they get this letter from Paul. And he assures them, here's the first thing. This mission that you have invested in, it seems to have gone wrong. Nothing's gone according to the way that Paul planned it. It seems to go wrong, but Paul says, actually, what has happened has advanced the gospel. Why did they send Epaphroditus out there and invest all that money in the first place? For the advance of the gospel. And Paul, who was a great strategist, had a great plan, but God's plan was different. It wasn't God's plan. God had his plan. Now, here's the important thing, and this is how we can apply it to our own situation. It's like, I remember, before coming to Morse Coombe, I had, Eric and I, we had a vision, a mission, and we would go to churches and tell them they were the best. But I can tell you, 19 years later, our plan wasn't this. It wasn't. And there was a point where Paul, he knew, when you read this epistle, we'll read it in a moment, Paul talks about how he's going to send Epaphroditus back and how God had spared Paul sorrow upon sorrow in healing Epaphroditus. But you can imagine there's a point where Epaphroditus is dying, Paul suddenly gets arrested and dragged up from prison. He can't see Epaphroditus. You can imagine the worry, the concern. At that moment, Epaphroditus and Paul must have been thinking, what has happened? Why has it all gone so terribly wrong? Mustn't they? Can you imagine the struggle? It's harder for us to imagine, but there he is in prison thinking, when he's just been made out, how is this going to help anything? And what about Epaphroditus and the rest of the team? They're not going to know what to do. But it took a bit of time to see what God was doing. So Paul comes to this point where Epaphroditus has now been made well, and the gospel has advanced. The gospel has advanced in all sorts of ways. Firstly, in the prison, loads of other prisoners and guards have got saved. That's what he says. And not only that, the effect that it's had on all the other brothers who are part of his team is they've been emboldened, it says. Now, when we find ourselves in difficult circumstances, sometimes we can only see the challenges. And when someone points out that actually it's not all bad, look, see what God is doing. We can respond by saying, oh yeah, but they're only doing that because of. And they're not sincere about it. Or, that won't last long, or whatever. And we can be a bit cynical, can't we? And it's as if Paul anticipates that in this passage. You can imagine some people saying, oh yeah, Paul's saying that they've all gone preaching the gospel, they're only doing it to stir up trouble. They're not really genuine about it. What does Paul say? What does it matter? Don't dwell on the things that we can interpret in that kind of way. God is working his immutable, indestructible purpose out. So if you'd have asked Paul, the day after he'd been banged up, how's things going, my guess is he'd have been a bit confused. And I imagine he would have been wise enough to say, right now I don't know, but we will see that actually this is for the advance of the gospel. But it's not just the advance of the gospel. I mean, how does Epaphroditus nearly dying advance the gospel? How does that play any role in it? You can imagine again the believers back in Philippi thinking, Paul said this and Paul said that, and now look what's happened. Epaphras is dying, he's in prison. He said God was with him. We can take that kind of tone, can't we? He said this, he said that. And you can imagine thinking, maybe the gospel is going forward, but Epaphroditus, he's dying. What good's that? And it's difficult sometimes to see, but what did Paul pray for the church at Philippi? We looked at it a few moments ago, and this is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more. This is what Paul writes about Epaphroditus, again in 2:25. I'll read a bit further on this time. He says, but I think it is necessary to send back to you Epaphroditus, my brother, co-worker and fellow soldier, who is also your messenger, who you sent to take care of my needs. Look at what it says. For he longs for all of you and is distressed. Why? Because you heard he was ill. So Epaphroditus knows that they know he's ill, and he's concerned for them because he knows that they're concerned for him. He knows that they're, because this is a brother. Again, if we imagine Jade, or you can imagine anyone else that's perhaps not with us this morning, the thing that you want to do most is see him again, isn't it? You just want them back where they're safe. And Paul says, I'm sending him back because he longs for all of you. And look at what he goes on to say. He longs for all of you and is distressed because you heard he was ill. He's distressed for them, even though he's the one who was dying. Indeed, he was ill and almost died. But look what he says, but God have mercy on him, and not on him only, but also, Paul says, on me. God have mercy on me to spare me sorrow upon sorrow. Therefore I, he says, am all the more eager to send him to you. You see, what's happened is Paul's love for Epaphroditus, his affections have grown for this man who he loves. He loved him already, but he loves him even more. And he sees Epaphroditus longing to be back with the Philippians. And he sees his love for the Philippians, and he's aware that the Philippians must be longing for him. And you can imagine whatever criticism the Philippians may have had about Paul, taking them off in this perilous thing where it's all gone belly up. You can imagine them reading these words, hearing Epaphroditus as well, and I'm glad to be sending him to you. You can see, can't you? Love growing and abounding. You know, when I said, you know, I'm sure God wants us to, our love to grow and abound. And we can think, we can think about what He's done for us in the gospel and His grace to us and think, I want to love people more. I want to love God more. And we all do this, don't we? Hopefully we want to love Him more. But we can respond by thinking, so I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. We talk about the things that we might do. And here's the thing. We can't really program these things. I'm not saying it's not good to do that. It's good to be intentional. Think, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. But God does what He does. He was answering that prayer that their love would abound. And He does it in ways we wouldn't choose. None of them would have wanted Epaphroditus to almost die out on the mission field. None of them would have chosen that. But you can see their affections and love beginning to abound more and more between Paul and the church in Philippi, between Epaphroditus and Paul, and Paul and Epaphroditus, and Epaphroditus and the church back in Philippi. Can't you? You can see that? God does things His way. He has His agenda. The gospel advancing, love abounding, as God works out His plans. Not in ways that we would choose, but in His way. Served to advance the gospel. I don't know why I bothered notes, I can never follow. Let's drop now down to verse 12. Sorry, not verse 12, verse 27. Whatever happens, he says, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. Then whether I come and see you or only hear about you in my absence, I will know that you stand firm in one spirit, without being frightened in any way by those who oppose you. So as we think about the future, how should we respond? So we've had, things haven't gone as we would choose. But if God is sovereign, they have gone as He has ordained. We're powerless to change what God has ordained. They've gone as God has ordained them. And the question is, how do we respond in the coming days? And Paul gives us some good pointers here. The first thing, whatever happens, whatever we do, we may not continue as a church. That's a possibility, certainly. Or we may continue in a different way. But he says, whatever happens, here's what we must do. Conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel. What does that mean? Well, it means this. I will know that you stand firm. That's the first thing. We stand firm in one spirit. We grow together, we unite. We stand firm in one spirit, striving together. Actually, the word striving, better translation is labouring together, working together. Working together for the sake of the gospel, for the faith of the gospel. So whatever we do from here, we come together. We stand firm. He says here, not being frightened by, in any way by those who oppose you. You see, it's not just people that oppose us, circumstances and situations. What they can do is, and we all experience this, possibly me more than anyone, is insecurity, fears. And we begin to, the danger is that we act out of insecurities and fears when we're faced with situations that aren't as we planned, and we're not sure what God's doing. So Paul says, don't react, don't be afraid in any way. Don't fear. That's a decision that we need to make. Don't act out of insecurities. At such times as this, it's a time for us to think, I'm going to stand firm. I'm not going to be afraid. I'm going to work together with brothers and sisters, because the Lord will show us how things will unfold. I've got a couple of encouragements for us in all of this. Giles alluded to a little bit of this. But so that we know that what has happened to us is God's purpose. Firstly, Giles and Lauren, okay? This is how things have worked for them. We got the news, the announcement from our good treasurer, Alan, back in May, that if we continue as we are, all our money will be gone come March 2016. And that will be it. It's like, oh my goodness me, that was a bit of a shock. And so, the next week, I met with Giles and Brenda, we talked, and we was talking about all sorts of things that we might do, starting to make plans and think about how do we respond to this news, because we don't want to just carry on as we are, that's just foolish. And we talked about maybe setting up some sort of a business or whatever, or both going part-time and me finding some other work. And while we was trying to work out what we might think we should do, Lauren got the news, somehow, or she was already aware, that her hours could increase, so Giles, so it could be released from being a burden financially, not in any other way, to our church's finances, without it having such a financial impact on them. So within that week, this came about. And here's the thing, what that meant was this, that if we didn't act then, and we decided we was going to act later, maybe the hours wouldn't be there for Lauren, and we have to let Giles go, and that would mean financial hardship for them. So we thought, the Lord's providence must be in that. And so we trusted the Lord in that. And so then Giles steps into a situation that none of us are satisfied with. It wasn't that. None of us thought, this is good, this is how we want to go forward. None of us thought that. We all knew we didn't want it to last like that. But what to do? And Giles, again, was thinking about applying for various jobs. And he just got an email out of the blue inviting him to apply for a job. God's got to be in that. Some of you will know that over our history, Giles has gone for this job here, that job there. He's done that. Nothing happened. But within a week of him taking a step of faith and stepping into a situation that none of us would choose, suddenly something comes up. And we don't know at that stage if it's the Lord's purpose, but all the way along it's just been confirmation, 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 confirmation. 100% agreement vote at the church that they're going to. That's unusual. And so it's like, clearly the Lord was in that. Now just imagine, we had said, no, Giles, there's some water in that actually. Let me share it with you, I'll come back to that in a moment, because it fits in with another piece. But if we take Jenny, I knew that Jenny had to go to a church in New Haven, because it was just not practical. It's always difficult saying goodbye to people, but she spoke to me on the phone, and so I said, I said it'd be good to chat with her pastor, and chat with the guy, and I didn't realise I know him very well, a guy called Christy, great guy. And he said, I won't try and do his accent, I'll really fuck it. He said, I'm really sorry. He said, I know what it's like when people leave. He said, I'm so sorry. He said, but she thinks God is in it, and if she's got your blessing. And he said to me, we're a new plant. They've just started this new church, or fairly new. He said, it's just been so hard. We've got older folks, and our only younger couple just left, because there are no other young couples. He said, it's a discouragement to us. He said, Jen, it's just a great encouragement. And he said, and we're hoping that this other couple will come back. It's like, wow, the Lord is, just when they came into that situation of what are we going to do? It's going in the wrong direction, and then boom. And we've had the blessing of being a part of her conversion as well. You know what I mean? So the Lord shared the blessing around. He could have given them the experience, the joy of the conversion, but gave it to us. And so the Lord is in that. And when we think about Giles and Lauren going, and we think about Jen going, what are we all about if it's not the advance of the gospel? And I tell you, Giles and Lauren will be far more useful to that church there than to us. There's just not the scope for ministry in our church, is there? And so I can see his gifts are going to be used. And the impact that Jen's going to make on the church that she's going to. And so we can see the Lord in these things. And but that's good to hear, isn't it? It's good to know, good to see God's hand in it. But it does leave us thinking, but what about us? What about us? Let me read you a letter that's dated on the 22nd of September. Dear Julian, I hope you are well. I just wanted to write to you as my granddad, my mum's dad, died last year, and my mum died 6 years ago. My sister and I received an inheritance which we would really like New Life to have a part of. My granddad, when he died, was a bishop in Church of Independent Anglican Catholic Minister. I don't quite know what that means, and was as far liberal as anyone could be. Women Catholic priests, and she lists a number of things that he was into. And then she says, no one in his church seemed to believe Jesus as God, and his funeral was the most worrying, crazy funeral I have been to, with the minister commending my granddad's involvement in Freemasons, Sufism, and various other fringe things as his path to God. My granddad was the chaplain at a few care homes where he would give communion, baptise children, and keep his communion cups next to a Hindu shrine. My granddad was a great fun granddad, and we had lots of great memories, but I feel he spent a lifetime searching and meanwhile pulling many people away from Christ. Anyway, I wanted you to have the money, as I feel you would do the complete opposite, and that despite my granddad's life, this money can still help people hear the gospel. So this couple just gave us this week. There's a cheque in the thing you want to pick up, £10,000. So it's like now here's the other thing with that, right? I've been thinking, so for us as a church, we've got to come up with some sort of, if there's any hope for us, we've got to find some sort of a strategy, funding-wise. Every single application that we've made for Jade's Post, we've got all the money we've asked for. Even FIEC and other churches that I know, Roehampton, they couldn't get money for Jade from them, and various others as well. But they've given us the money that we asked for. We've been given £5,000 just out of the blue, and now another 10,000. So that's £22,000 we've been given since we heard the news that, we've got a financial crisis on our hands. Okay? Now here's the thing. Had we looked forward, had we known that money was coming, there would have been no need for Giles to have stopped his employment with us. And had that happened, then maybe he wouldn't be going. But the Lord has ordered things in such a way because it was time for Lauren and Giles to move on. But I think he's saying, at the same time, it's like he says to us, but don't think I've finished with you. Here's provision. The date is significant, 22nd. And on the 22nd, so I've been working on a strategy, a funding strategy. On the 22nd, the day that they sent this letter, not the day they got it, I got it the 24th, I sent one pastor of one church of over 150 churches that are on our prayer list that support us prayerfully. I sent one pastor my strategy and said to him, because I've spoken to him about it before, I said, can you have a look at it? If you're comfortable with it, then would you give it to your members? If not, can you annotate it and let me know some changes that I might make? I got an email back from him saying, no, it's good, I'll give it to our members. That was on the 22nd. This letter is dated on the 22nd. This is a member of his church. And they didn't see the letter that I had sent because until just after they sent this. I emailed them. I've got a copy of their email. And they said, we hadn't seen the letter. They said we was absolutely amazed when we saw the letter from you. We just put the letter in the post. Isn't that amazing? Not only that, just that the Lord's revealed in small bits of information to us. His hand at work. His hand at work. Blessing the church in New Haven. Yeah, that was discouraged. But giving us the joy of seeing this person come to faith and now we can send them on. Yeah, we're glad to send. Giles and Laura are going to go and bless another church. And then the Lord, with his hand on us, saying, I haven't forsaken you. I've got purpose plans for you. Whatever those might be, whether it's us continue as a church or not, at this stage I don't know. But what I do know is the Lord is with us. And we should be really encouraged. So let's, in the coming days, let's not get insecure or panicked or worried. Let's stand firm together and work together for the sake of the gospel. And his will be done.